Hey everyone, hope you are doing awesome. Welcome back to my channel Pega Hut with another video. Thanks everyone for subscribing to my channel, and if you haven't hit the bell icon yet, please do so you won't miss any of my videos. Please hit the like button and leave me a comment or feedback if you like the video or the way I have explained. Welcome to the REST API series part 3.3. So far what we have covered is we have covered part 3.1 and 3.2, wherein I have explained on how to connect Pega to a GET API and how to connect Pega to a POST API. As per my previous plan in part 3.3, I had to explain service REST, but as per the request of one of our member, where I replanned it, and in part 3.3, I have included how to configure the endpoint URL of an API dynamically. So I thought it's a good plan wherein I can explain you this first before I go to service REST. So that's why I have included this plan, and today we are going to discuss about part 3.3, wherein dynamically configure the API URL. Now to achieve this part 3.3, we got two different things to achieve or to learn. One is application setting, another one is GRS, which is called global resource syntax, or sometimes you would heard global resource setting. Now if I wanted to understand about application setting, then I need to understand about how to create a new application setting in Pega, and then how to create a new category wherein I can include that category into application setting, and then how to configure the endpoint URL in application setting and how does it work dynamically. And I would also explain you how you can refer this application setting whatever you have created, and then you can use that in Connect REST tool to load the endpoint URL dynamically. So first just understand about application setting, then we'll go to the GRS wherein I'll explain the hands-on. In any IT world, like how you're working in dev environment, and then you take the package to production until production by deploying into test environment, staging environment, production environment. So similarly, even your provider, API provider, will also have the same setup. So with respect to that point, what will happen is when we are going to also do dev, we are going to consume the dev endpoint URL for that particular provider, right? Now, for example, this is a API endpoint URL. So dummy.rest API example, consider it's a dev environment. Now, when I take my code to production, I need to use their production environment where most likely everything will be same, but the host name will be different, right? Now, if I would hard code over here, obviously there is no way I can change in production unless I put this into a production rule set, or I would edit there, which is not recommended, and you can't do it right in the production environment. So we need to make it configurable. So that's the whole idea. Now, how would you do configurable? So let's say here in my last video, you would have seen me directly putting this URL where this ID as a parameter. If you see, this ID is coming from request.id, where we are setting this request.id in my get data transform, right? Now click on this update new endpoint configuration. So update new endpoint configuration, the moment you click on this, automatically the URL will be converted, this one. So again, this provide URL is again going to be a hard coded one. So obviously you can't change this base URL in production. So for that you need to again check out and check in all these things you need to do. So you need to do configurable. So do configurable, you need to click on the use application setting. Now application setting, now what is application setting? First thing is where we can find the application setting. So if I go to record explorer and system admin, this is where you're going to find application setting. Now what application setting is, I'll just talk probably 1 minute for this. So this is how application setting will look like. So each application setting, it's a rule instance. First of all, it's a rule instance. Now what it does, it will be part of a rule group, rule set version. Now this application setting will take a category. Category is nothing but a tag, right? I mean, let's say if you have multiple application setting, you want to group them into a category. For example, you have multiple application setting for integration URL, for other username, or for multiple application setting for let's say port number or something. So you can group them. That's all about category. Now here, if you see here, right, so here you can choose whether it's a string text, whether it's a boolean, or it's a enumerated list. Now if you say boolean, it will say true or false. If you put a string and text, means you can provide the text field. So whatever the string field. Now in our scenario is going to be string and text, because we need to provide the URL, and the URL is string, right? So this is what application setting would look like. Now okay, first let me tell you about what is the difference between the sandbox development, quality assurance, and staging production is the server that Pega provides. So for example, this is a server, right? Now it is my development server. Now how would you get to know? So basically, or how would you tell that it's a development server? How would you tell the other server is a production? So to do that, in the system setting, there is something called system. Now in the system, if you open, so you got this PRPC and Pega system, right? If you open PRPC, here it will tell which system it is. So currently, if you see, my system localhost is a development. If I wanted to change it to production, I can change it to production and put 5 hyphen. So now how this relate to application setting? You must be thinking now. Now if you see here, if I come back over here, so let's say if I put URL is test1, okay. If I put URL over here, yes, test2. If I put URL is test3. So what Pega do during runtime, Pega will try to find out which PRPC or system, whatever system. Let's say some people just create their own system, some people use the default one. Now how does this application setting relate to this particular system? So whenever you use the application setting, depending on the production level of your respective server, during runtime Pega goes and finds out whatever production server production level you have got, and depending on that it picks up that correspondence value from the application setting so that you can map depending on the environment. Okay, now let's create one system setting for us, application setting for us. Now here I'll create application setting. Here what application setting we are doing is we are configuring the endpoint URL, right? This is the level endpoint, let's say endpoint URL. Okay, now we are configuring the endpoint URL, right? Now ID became endpoint URL. Now here what we are doing is we are kind of providing a owning role set. Now what owning role set generally you give is depending on what kind of rule set stack you got. So here what I'm going to do is I'll just go ahead and give PZ Hut, as that is my owning role set, right? PZ Hut. And now here I need to justify or define which rule set that this application rule set application setting should be part of. Now this is my rule set PZ Hut 112. This is the open rule set, so I'll go ahead create and open one. Now here, now coming back to category. Okay, now this category is nothing but you just define what kind of category you have got. So for example, here there is one category which is already defined called remote application, right? So let's create one new category here. So what I'll do for new category is, now if I go back to the API, now here if I just click on the down arrow, then I can choose the category name that I have created. Now that's pretty much about the category name. Now coming back to this, for example, if let's say if you got 5 Pega system, and first find out for those respective system which API endpoint URL or which API host that you are going to connect. Let's say for example, if you see the API that we are trying to test over here is this one, right? Now if I just quickly open the notepad, so let's say this if your API team gives you this URL as their dev URL, okay, and hypothetically let's say you got all this URL for their respective QA, staging and prod environment, and you are going to connect from our respective environment. Now this is my dev level setting, right? I just shown you before that if you go to system, if you go to Pega PRPC, so this is my development level, right? Now my development level should connect to the API development level. So what should I what is the URL that I need to use? I need to use this URL, and my QA should point to my UAT level, so I should be using this URL against that. So similarly you need to put staging and production. So this is how you need to define URL. Now what will happen once you define the URL? Okay, let me first go ahead and define the URL. So I do not have, let's say consider I do not have a sandbox. So what I'm going to do is I need to put the same URL like this. Now how would you put the URL? So there are two ways you can do. So first thing is you can so that if I take this URL, first thing is you can just put the host name, and rest everything you can divide in the connector. So I'll show you here. So what you can do is, let's say if I just quickly put only the host name here, okay, let's say my sandbox will connect to dev, my development will connect to dev. However, if I let's say if my QA is going to connect to UAT of that particular API, and then my staging will connect to the staging of the API, and my production will connect to the production application setting I have created. Now if I go back to the connector, right, here what I'm going to do is, if you click on the down arrow, automatically the whatever you have just created, you can get it over here. So api.endpoint URL is what I've created. So if I just click on over here, you automatically get to know this api.endpoint URL has been pointed out. Now what will happen after that? What happened is, automatically when you use this application setting, see this part is been added. So it is as good as you define this entire host name in the application setting, and then these are the additional path that you are appending with the application setting. In that additional path, see here, if you see, API is a constant, v1 is a constant, employee is a constant, and ID is coming from a clipboard where we are mapping it from request.id, right? Because if you see my URL here, we have to pass this one, right? The one is nothing but the ID that we have created. Now this ID, what we are doing is, if I go to d underscore get employee, get one second, I'll show you. If I go to d underscore get employee ID, so if you see in the request data transform, the request.id is what we are mapping, right? This request.id should be passed in this ID, isn't it? Now that is what exactly we are doing here. If you see connector, instead of ID, they are mapping directly the request ID, which is here. So now I'll save it and I'll quickly run past it, and then I'll explain the next step. Now if I go to this d underscore get employee ID, if I run this, okay, and here what I'll do is, I'll also turn on the tracer just so that you would understand. I'll just close all the other things. I'll turn on the tracer so you would see how it works. Now if I go here, now I'll just run the database. So if I go deploy action run, okay, and now I'll clear everything up. Here I'll pass just one. Now if I pass one, if I hit, let's see what happens. So first thing is, I got my response, right, which is good thing. Now let's see how it works, right? Now if I just search for connect, alright, so if you remember last time I've shown you guys, so this is where the response data transform being called. So we should have got everything beforehand, right? Now if you see exactly at this point, right, rule connect rest py rest connector. If I click on this unnamed the step page, here there is something called py embed URL, right? So this is where it actually stores the URL that we just defined. So basically the base URL, it just got all the URL, and then it kind of acted all the rest of it. So if you see the connector, it kind of acted all the rest of as a query parameter, and then it basically appended in the URL. So basically what it did, it took this host name and then appended with API, appended with v1, appended with employee, and appended with request.id. So that kind of defined my URL like this, right? That kind of made my URL like this, and hence because of that we could able to get the response back from the API. So if you see, because of that we could able to get the response back from the API. The moment I could able to finish the connector, I'll have all the responses that came from the backend. I hope now you got to know how the URL been set. I'll just show you another way how it has been set. Before I show you the another way, I'll just quickly again explain you about the the way it works is like you define this application setting and you define the additional path of the URL. In the application setting, what Pega does during runtime? During runtime, basically Pega try to find out what production level your Pega is, and then they basically pick up the correspondence URL, and then they try to construct this URL and then go to the system and talk to them.
So this is our, so you know what is the beauty of this one? That means if I just deploy this to a production level 5, and what happened is during runtime, Pega will go to that respective application setting and pick this URL when it is in production. Now the other way which I was trying to show you is, instead of putting all this thing over here, all you can do is just put the request ID. That's all. So what you can do is, like I told, all you can do is just put the request ID. So to do that, what you can do is, I just copied this one. So you can just delete all this constant. As you know, in this particular URL, as you know, until this point everything is constant, right? You just have this as a variable, right? So as you know, this is constant. All you need to do is copy this entire thing and put in the application setting instead. So what I did is, I put the request ID as a parameter which I'm mapping to ID as per my API contract. And in the API endpoint URL, what I'll do is, I'll go directly edit this path and put the additional thing. So if you see now, my URL would be exactly like this, right? So if I just go delete this page, so exactly now this is going to be my URL, which will be part of my application setting. Because see, any environment, most likely only the host name will change, right? Only the host name will change, nothing else. So that's the reason why you can define this also. So if you define this also, it should work, no problem on that. I'll quickly show you. I'll quickly run the data page and show you to you guys. So if I just again go quickly, so if you see at the moment, what is my base URL? My base URL been picked up until example.com, right? Now let me close this one, let me clear this one, let me play this one, and then run the dbase again. Now if I have flushed the database, so that means it will pick the latest one. So if I just quickly run the database, I get my all the data, whatever I necessary. I'll quickly, I think I haven't got the data. Okay, oh sorry, I think I haven't got the data. So what let me quickly have a look. So if I just go and pause it, okay, connect is here. What I'll do is, I'll just try to find out what my URL is. Now my URL is py. If I go to py embed URL, so yes, my base URL been picked up. Earlier it was example. Oh, okay, got it. I think I didn't save this one. So see how you see all the 4 parameters, right? So what I need to do is, I need to set the connect rule. So if I go to get, now I have only one resource path parameter, right? But here if you see, there are 4, right? That's why I got to know that I haven't saved this one. Now that I have saved it, if I just quickly close this one and again play the tracer, and now if I do run, it should come all the details. Now if I expand data, see how you get the values. Now if I quickly go and check the connect, and in the connect, in the py invoke rest connector unnamed, if I click on this one and I'll say py embed, so here now you see, because I didn't save, that's why it has got 4 parameter. Now it got just one, which is ID, which is mapping from request ID, and the value is 1. And then now this is the URL that it is picking. So I hope this is clear. I've told you how to create an application setting, and I've told you also how to use them. But there is still a problem. You know what? So what happened is, so how can you do in a even another advanced way, right? So what happened is, let's say if they haven't given you the URL, or they do not know about the URL, the provider do not know about the URL, or the second chances would be, let's say if you have typed it wrong and at later point of time in production day you realize that you need to change it because it's wrong. So during that time, what would you do? So there are basically 2 ways that you can achieve this. Now one thing what you can do is, you can put that into a production rule set where you can make everybody to edit, and then you can do whatever you want. That one way you can do it. Or the second way what you can do is, I would say the second best way what you can do is, you can use the GRS concept, which we call global resource setting concept over here. Now what is global resource setting or syntax concept? So as you could see at the bottom, you see note global resource setting, GRS is supported for the value. Now what is this global resource setting is been there. So until 8.3, right? So if I go back to here, now I'll just quickly save it and I'll quickly check it in, just so that I can show you what I wanted to show. So if I go back to here, until 8.3, Pega used to support GRS functionality. Now I'll explain in a moment what is GRS. Now, by using the GRS, global resource setting, you can define. So basically, you can get all the URL loaded to a node level database, and here you can, by putting an equal to, you can provide that dpace, and the URL will be auto configured here during runtime. But after 8.3, I think Pega stopped it. Pega has recommended user to go ahead with this path. And now Pega is recommending to go ahead with application setting, and if required, you can go ahead and use the GRS over there. So basically, now what we're going to do is we are going to create a GRS. I'll show you step by step process on how to create a GRS, and I'll also show you on how you can easily configure that GRS. Now we have reached to the second part of our video, wherein we are going to understand about GRS. What is GRS and how we can configure. Now, to understand about GRS, these are the steps that we need to follow. Now we need to create a data class first, and then we need to create a database which belongs to that data class, and that database has to be node level. And then we are going to create a data transform which will be sourced as part of the database. And in the data transform, we are going to create a page property which will hold those URL, and those URL can be sourced by using dynamic system setting. So we will create a dynamic system setting, and I'm going to show you how we can fetch that and how we can update in higher environment. And at the end, we are going to integrate that entire GRS to application setting, and I'll show you how you can use that to configure the endpoint URL. So without doing further delay, let's quickly get into the practical mode of GRS. Alright, the first step, what we're gonna do is, as we discussed, that we're gonna create a data layer class. Okay, so what I'm going to do is, I'll create a quick data layer class here. Now to do that, system admin, and then class. Okay, so this class, what I'm going to name is a resource setting. So I'll say a resource setting. Alright, I'll go with the same rule set, and I'll just create an open. Alright, now this class, what I'm going to do is, I'll leave that as is here, and I'll create a version of this particular class. Alright, it can be an abstract class, no problem in that. Okay, so it's like I need to choose the highest version, which is open. So I'll just choose that, and then I'll put some text here. Now my first step is done, my class is created. So if I'll go to data, my class is created called resource setting. Now second thing, what is my second step? I need to create a database over here. Now that database has to be a node level database here. Okay, and what's the reason behind it? Because you don't want, I mean, the endpoint URL would not change very often, right? So you don't want it to be loaded in thread base. It has to be a node level, so that it can load once and it will be there. Okay, that's the whole idea. Now to do a database, I'll go to data model database, and I'll say resource setting again. Okay, now here if you see, my database name is resource setting. I'll create and open. So what are the changes that I'm going to do? I'll keep that as base, and I'll say I'll make it a node, and here what I'm going to do is, I'll choose data transform. So simple, I'm going to create a data transform. But before that, as we all know, that node level database needs an access group. Now if anybody wants to know why we need an access group, then refer to my database detailed explanation video, so that you'll get to know. So what I'm going to do is, I'll just quickly give the access group that I am in. So I'll probably give Pega Hut author. So I'll just quickly see the access group. Yeah, Pega Hut author is what the access group I'm going to give. And here in the data transform, I'll create a data transform called resource setting. Well, I'm just trying to keep it consistent as per the naming standard. You can change anything. You can change resource setting DT or something. So I can do that, anything. Okay, I'm just trying to keep it consistent. So let me put the resource setting DT. So what I'll do is, first I'll create the resource setting DT, then I'm going to come and save it back. So now I'm going to create a data transform here. I'll say command just to save this data transform first before I start. And then here what I'm going to do is, I'll save this database. Okay, now this is done. Now my database is done. My database is node level, and my database is referring to this data transform, which is a resource setting. Now here what I'm going to do is, in this resource setting is where I'm going to set my URLs. So to do that, I need to store in a property. So it's a best practice that you should always store in a page group property. The reason behind is, let's say you got multiple API. Let's say you got create employee API, retrieve employee API, and for those API, the URLs will be different, right? Now, if you create a page group, it's very easy for you to find out which API it is, and it's gonna be easy for you to go and search for the endpoint URL. So that's the reason why you should create a page group property. Now what I'm going to do is I'll create a page group property, and I'll probably name it as a endpoint URL. Okay. Now here in the resource setting, I'll go to create data model, and I'll create a property, and that property I'll say endpoint URL. Okay. Now this endpoint URL, remember, it has to be a page group, as I told, right? It has to be a page group. Now the moment it is a page group, it's going to ask you for a definition class. So what we need to do is, generally in real time, if we create a page group or a page list, we need to create another class where I can have that endpoint URL, where I can store that endpoint URL, right? But you actually don't need to. Pega provides an OOTB class for REST API, which you can use over here. So to find out what class you need to use, what you can do is, so that OOTB property name is py endpoint URL. Now what you can do is, you can just search py endpoint and see to store this endpoint URL, what Pega provides different classes. Now here we are going to store all the REST API, right, endpoint URL, right? So you need to use these classes as part of the page group. So I just need to open and show you guys. So if I open this HTTP, and if I go to this class, Pega provides this OOTB class so that you can store all the endpoint URL over here for the HTTP. So if I use that class, then all I need to do is I need to set that endpoint URL in that page group. So now my property is all set. Now, so if I quickly recap what we did, we created a class, and after that we created a database. That database is going to call a data transform, and then we created a property called endpoint URL, which is a page group, and then we are going to have a page definition for that particular page group is embed -env connect http, so that I can use this py endpoint URL property, OOTB property, instead of creating a fresh one. Now how I'm going to set this one? Let's say I'm going to set two endpoint URLs so that you can find the difference between this way. So these two. So what you can do is, you can do set, and then you will do dot endpoint URL. Now if I do dot, what I'm gonna get? py endpoint URL. Now endpoint URL, what we did, we created this as a page group. So now let's say we have I've shown you in my previous example two API, right? One is create employee, another one retrieve employee. Now let's start from the retrieve employee, right? Retrieve employee. If I'll put endpoint URL as retrieve employee, now this is where I need to source the endpoint URL. Now to do that, you have two options here. One option, you store in DSS. DSS is a data instance, which kind of a config value. People who do not know can learn from this video. Or you can store in a data table, where you can fetch by another database. So it's up to you how you want to do it, but the easiest or the best way is just go for a DSS. Now how you are going to create a DSS is what I'm going to show you now. Now DSS is nothing but dynamic system setting. So people who are new to Pega, dynamic system setting is kind of a config value where you can config anything and you can change at any point of time without have to change the code. So it's like any code you take, how we have config value, and you just go and change it. Now where it is present in the record explorer, if you go to system admin, then there is something called dynamic system setting, which is here. Now if I click on this dynamic setting, so what this does, basically it takes a owning rule set, which is a key, and it takes setting purpose, which is another key, and you can set the value of it. Okay, now if you see there are a lot of DSS, and if I open any DSS, it will have the value. All I need to do is I can change this value and save it. Automatically the value will be changed. Now this is all about dynamic setting, and it's one of the crucial portion of Pega, as you can configure a lot of things without have to change the code. Now let's create a dynamic setting. So when I create a dynamic setting, what sort description that I'm okay, endpoint URL for I'll just copy the page group name, whatever that I have put. By doing that, it's sometimes easy to search for retrieve employee. Okay, now here owning rule set, I'm going to do retrieve employee, and setting purpose, sorry, my bad, setting purpose should be your retrieve employee. Okay, you can do anything, but the way that we do is your setting purpose should be your retrieve employee, and your owning rule set should be your whatever the rule set. Now my rule set is PZ Hut, right? So PZ Hut, it doesn't need to be exactly this, it's just like it will differentiate. Okay, it will tell, okay, this is the owning rule set and this is the setting purpose. You can type anything over here, you still can able to fetch it, but this is just a standard that we follow in real time. Now I'll create an open. Now it will give me option to provide me the value. Now what kind of value that I need to provide? I need to provide the value that we have in the application setting. So if I go to the application setting we have, now I'll copy whatever value that we are connecting as part of development, because this is the one which I need at the moment, and I'll show you how we can change it later point of time. So if I go to the retrieve employee, so here I'm going to put the same value that I have put in the application setting. Now I hope this is clear. Now I'll save it. Now if I go back to the data transform, right? So how can I achieve or how can I retrieve this value and set it to this property? So to do that, there is a OOTB function which is called get data system setting something. So if I just hover on the get data system setting, what it tells that pass me the string owning rule set and pass me the setting, and I'll give you the answer. So if you click on this plus, so it will come, we can use this function. So here, what is my owning rule set? If I come to the DSS, if I hover here, my owning rule set is PZ Hut, right? So I'll copy this PZ Hut, I'll go here and I'll pass this as a string. Now, second thing is, what is my setting purpose? My setting purpose is retrieve employee. So I'll copy this retrieve employee, and if I'll just put a comma and I'll pass this as a string, if I'll pass this as a string, now what you can do is here itself you can do the test, and once I do test, you see whatever the value that I have put in the DSS, automatically I can fetch as by using this function. And because of that, what will happen is this will set to this particular variable. Now similarly, what I'm going to do is I'll do another one just to show you guys the difference. Now here I'll put retrieve employee, and here I'll put create employee. Now create employee, what I'm going to do is I'll just go over here, okay, and I'll do a save as, okay, instead of creating a new, they both are same. So here what I'm going to do is I'll say create employee instead of retrieve employee, okay. I'll say create employee, okay, 1 second, for create employee, and here setting purpose create employee, and I'll leave the owning rule set as is, right? Now if I go and open this one, and if I go and open the connect rest or the endpoint URL, I'll just copy from here. I'll copy from here, and then I'll do is I'll just paste it over here. This is create employee, and I'm going to paste the URL. Okay, it's as good as I've created it. Instead of creating a new, I've just saved this so that it will be faster. Now what I'll do is I'll do the same thing. What I'll do is I'll come here and I'll just copy this one, paste it like this. And instead of get employee, what is my own setting purpose is create employee is my setting purpose, and I'm going to set the create employee. Control Z. All right, all good. Now if I test, I should be able to get the URL that I have configured. All right, I'm getting that. All right, all good. So my data transform is also set. So now what should I do is I'll go and run the database that I have created. So if I go ahead and click on run, and if I just quickly flush the database just to make sure and click on run. So what will happen is this database will hold the endpoint URL that we have configured, and those two endpoint URL are retrieve employee and create employee as per the page group. So as you could see, retrieve employee will have this URL and create employee will have this URL, right? Now, so this is how you get those URL configured and load that into node level database. Now the last step which you need to do is you need to get instead of hard coding the URL in the application setting, what you need to do is you need to place this database in the application setting. Now, how would you do that? If I just go to clipboard quickly, as it's a node level database, where I can find this, I can find this in the database level. So if I expand database, if I expand the node, you would find d underscore resource setting over here. Now, once you find the d underscore resource setting, just expand the endpoint URL. Let's say I'll just show you one example for retrieve employee, as we have configured that before. So what my endpoint URL would be, see, you just copy the entire thing, d underscore resource setting dot endpoint URL. Let me form it over here so that you would understand, and paste it over here. All right, and then I'll get this in, because this is where my endpoint URL is there, right? This set thing. So if I get it over here, then I'll do dot and this one. Okay, so this is what my retrieve employee ID would be. Now if I copy this entire thing, now I go to application setting. All right, now instead of doing putting that hard-coded URL, what I'm going to do is I'll put everywhere equal to and the whatever I have copied. Okay, so basically what I'm going to put is this one, equal to this one. This is the format that we use the GRS. Okay, so equal to this one, equal to everywhere I'm gonna put it. I'll tell you why and how it's gonna help us in the later point. So I'll put everywhere here. Now I'll quickly do a quick round of tests to show you whether it works or not. Now to do that, what I'll do is I'll go to again the database. So I'll search for d underscore retrieve employee. Sorry, get employee maybe. Yeah, d underscore get employee. I'll do action and run. And over there, I'll pass the ID as 1, and I'll do a plus. And also what I will do is I will flush this resource setting just to make sure I can show you, how it got loaded. Submit. I flush everything so that you can see that. And now I'll turn on the tracer in the background. So I'll clear it and I'll say play, and then I'll go to this employee and run. Now let's see, the first thing first, I need to see whether my data are coming. My data are coming successfully, and we'll quickly go and read it, how it works. So if you click on connect, right, again the same thing. So here if you see, this is my response data run. So this is the exact place, right? Now this is the exact place where it happened. But before that, if you could see at this point, right, d underscore resource, can you see my database being loaded by Pega? So at this point, if you see, the database been loaded, and if I click on this unnamed right here, where the d resource setting been called, if I click on this unnamed, if I go py embed URL, so at the moment I do not have the URL, right? Pega hasn't loaded yet. Now after at this stage where it goes and calls the d underscore resource setting, because it is still in the application setting, and try to goes and loads the resource setting. Once it finishes the resource setting, if I just quickly come here at this where the activity ends. Now if I click on this unnamed one, all right, and here if I just go and see, you see my data, my base URL being loaded from the d underscore resource setting. I hope this is clear, and that's how it uses this URL along with this ID, and it gets me all the detail. Now you must be thinking, why we need to have this GRS setting while connecting to an API. So I'll tell you why. So basically, think in a situation, right? Now what we did is, now here in my application setting, all I did is I've just put the GRS configuration. Now let's say I have saved in, I have checked in all the rules, and now I have packaged the entire rule set, and I have pushed it to, let's say, higher environment, let's say production. On the production day, let's say our API team has given this URL for their prod, and then on the production day they told, no, sorry, we have did it wrong. Our URL is something like this. Let's say, just example, right? So that means there is a URL change, isn't it? So if the URL is changed, what I need to do is, all I need to do is copy this URL, okay, and come to this d underscore the DSS, wherever it is. Here I'll copy this, I'll paste this URL, whatever I have, and I'll save it. And then another step that I need to do is, I'll go here and I'll create the database. Now once I create the database, when the database will load, it will have the fresh data. Now if I run it, all you need to do is quickly run it, and you will see the latest URL been updated already as part of my endpoint URL. Can you see the dot dummy has been updated? So this is where I don't need to change any of my code, and still I can go ahead and update the respective URL. So it's all depend on how the design you have at the moment. You can just simply go ahead with the application structure. If you are 100% application setting, if you are 100% sure about the URL, not sure about the URL, then I would suggest you still go ahead with the GRS concept, wherein you can configure and you do not need to change any code. That's pretty much it for today, and I hope you are clear about how dynamically you can set the API endpoint URL and how you can configure.
That's it for today, and hope you understood clearly. Please hit the like button if you learned something or you like the way I have explained, and leave me a comment if you have any queries or feedback for me. It will help me to improve and also motivate me to post more concepts and videos. As I always tell, sharing is caring, so do share with others so people who do not know about my channel will be benefited. Stay tuned for my next video, and if you haven't subscribed to my channel yet, please do subscribe and click on the bell notification for my new video updates. Thanks for watching and see you in the next video.